My name is Jana Johnson. I'm 32 years old, and this is the story of how I was completely invisible to my own family for 15 long years. They excluded me from weddings, birthdays, graduations, and every single moment that mattered in our family's life. I wasn't even invited to my own grandmother's funeral. Can you imagine that kind of rejection? But here's the twist that nobody saw coming. Now they're all standing at my doorstep, begging to be part of my success story. If you've ever felt abandoned by the people who were supposed to love you unconditionally, please hit that subscribe button and give this video a like, because this story might just change how you see your own worth. You won't believe what happened when I opened that door after 15 years of silence. There they were, my parents, my siblings, even my aunt who once told me I was too different to fit in with the family. Their faces showed a mixture of shame and desperation that I had never seen before. The same people who treated me like I was invisible suddenly couldn't take their eyes off me. It was like watching a movie where the villain realizes they've been wrong all along. Except this wasn't fiction. This was my real life. The irony was almost laughable, if it wasn't so painful. For years, I had dreamed of this moment when they would realize my value and come back to me. I had imagined countless scenarios where they would apologize and beg for forgiveness. But when it actually happened, I felt something I didn't expect: complete control over the situation. The scared little girl who used to cry herself to sleep wondering what was wrong with her was gone, replaced by a woman who knew exactly what she was worth. Standing there in my designer dress, in the doorway of my beautiful home that I had worked so hard to afford, I realized something powerful. They hadn't changed because they suddenly discovered they loved me. They changed because they discovered I had something they wanted. Success has a funny way of making people remember your phone number, doesn't it? The same relatives who couldn't be bothered to send a birthday card were now asking about my business, my achievements, my life that they had chosen to ignore for so long. But here's what really shocked me about that moment. I felt absolutely nothing for them. No anger, no joy, no sadness, just a cold, clear understanding of who they really were. These people had made their choice 15 years ago when they decided I wasn't worth their time or love. And now, as I looked at their desperate faces, I realized I was about to make mine. The question wasn't whether I could forgive them. It was whether they deserved a place in the life I had built without them. Let me paint you a picture of what rejection really looks like when it comes from your own blood. Imagine being the ghost at your own family gatherings, present but unseen, speaking but unheard, loving but unloved. That was my reality for 15 years, and if you've ever felt like the outsider in your own family, you know exactly what I'm talking about. The pain of family rejection cuts deeper than any other betrayal, because these are supposed to be the people who love you no matter what. Hit that subscribe button if you've ever felt this kind of pain, and let me know in the comments if you've experienced family exclusion, because you're definitely not alone in this struggle. Family exclusion isn't like being rejected by friends or colleagues. It's a special kind of torture that follows you everywhere. You can't escape it because it's written in your DNA, carved into your childhood memories, and embedded in every holiday tradition you'll never be part of. I used to watch other families on social media, seeing their happy reunions and thinking, what's wrong with me that my own family doesn't want me around? The worst part wasn't the big events I missed. It was the small, everyday moments of connection that I was never invited to share. Phone calls that never came, text messages that were never sent, and the crushing realization that I simply didn't matter to them. The emotional weight of being unwanted by your own family is something that changes you at a cellular level. You start questioning everything about yourself, your personality, your choices, your worth as a human being. I spent years in therapy trying to understand what I had done wrong, what terrible flaw in my character had made my family turn their backs on me. The answer, as I would later learn, wasn't about me at all. It was about them and their inability to accept someone who didn't fit their narrow definition of what family should be. But understanding that intellectually and healing from it emotionally are two completely different things. There's a particular kind of strength that grows in the soil of rejection, though most people don't realize it until years later. When you're forced to become your own family, your own support system, your own cheerleader, you develop muscles that people from loving families never need to build. I learned to celebrate my own victories, comfort myself through failures, and create traditions that actually meant something to me. It wasn't easy, and there were nights when I cried myself to sleep wishing things were different. But slowly, I was building something more valuable than their approval. I was building self-respect. This story isn't just about revenge, though that element is definitely there and it's deliciously satisfying. This is about the transformation that happens when you stop waiting for other people to validate your existence and start creating a life so beautiful that everyone wants to be part of it. It's about the moment when you realize that their rejection was actually the greatest gift they could have given you, because it forced you to become the person you were always meant to be. And trust me, when we get to the part where they're literally begging to be let back into my life, you'll understand exactly why this rejection turned out to be my redemption story. The abandonment didn't happen overnight. It was a slow, painful process that started when I was just 17 years old. It began with small things that I didn't even notice at first. My mom, Sarah, would forget to invite me to family dinners. My sister, Rebecca, would make plans with our cousins without including me, and my dad, Michael, would have long conversations with my brother, David, about future plans that somehow never involved me. It was like watching myself being erased from the family picture, one small detail at a time. Have you ever experienced that feeling where you're physically present, but emotionally invisible to the people who are supposed to love you most? The breaking point came during my cousin Lisa's wedding when I was 18. I had bought a beautiful dress, saved money for a gift, and was genuinely excited to celebrate with the family. But when the invitations were sent out, somehow mine got lost in the mail. At least that's what my aunt told me when I asked about it 3 days before the ceremony. I'll never forget standing in my room, holding that dress, realizing that they had deliberately chosen to exclude me from one of the most important family events of the year. The dress still hangs in my closet as a reminder of that moment when I truly understood that I was no longer considered part of their circle. What made the rejection even more painful was that nobody ever explained why it was happening. There was no big fight, no dramatic confrontation, no clear reason for the sudden cold shoulder. It was like being slowly frozen out of existence without any warning or explanation. I would call my mom and get short, distant responses where she used to be warm and chatty. Family group chats would go silent when I joined them. Holiday plans would be made around me, not with me, as if I had become some kind of inconvenient obstacle to their happiness. The psychological impact of being abandoned by your own family is something that cuts deeper than any other kind of rejection. Friends can come and go. Romantic relationships can end, but family is supposed to be forever, or at least that's what everyone tells you. When the people who share your blood decide you're not worth their time, it makes you question everything about your identity and your place in the world. I spent countless nights wondering what I had done wrong, replaying conversations and interactions, trying to find the moment when everything changed. Looking back now, I can see that their rejection was actually revealing their true character, not mine. They were showing me that their love was conditional, that their acceptance depended on me fitting into their narrow box of expectations. But at the time, all I could feel was the devastating loneliness of being cast out from the only family I had ever known. Little did I know that this abandonment would become the foundation for the incredible strength I would later build. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. First, you need to understand just how deep this rabbit hole of family dysfunction really went. Living with family exclusion for 15 years taught me things about human resilience that no self-help book could ever capture. Every birthday that passed without a call, every Christmas spent alone, every achievement celebrated in solitude. It was like carrying an invisible weight that nobody else could see or understand. I became an expert at pretending everything was fine while dying a little inside each time I saw other people's family photos on social media. If you're going through something similar right now, please subscribe to this channel and hit that like button, because I want you to know that your pain is valid, your feelings matter, and this story has a victory ending that might give you hope for your own journey. The hardest part about being excluded from your family isn't the big dramatic moments. It's the constant daily reminder that you don't belong anywhere. I would walk into grocery stores and see families shopping together, laughing and arguing about what to have for dinner. And I'd feel this sharp pang of longing that took my breath away. Holidays became torture sessions where I had to pretend to be busy and happy while everyone else was surrounded by love and tradition. I learned to lie convincingly about my weekend plans, my holiday celebrations, and why I never talked about my family at work or with friends. The isolation began to change my personality in ways I didn't even recognize at first. I became fiercely independent, almost to a fault, because depending on anyone felt too risky after being let down so completely by the people who were supposed to love me unconditionally. I stopped sharing good news because there was nobody to call, stopped seeking comfort during bad times because there was nobody to turn to. Every accomplishment felt hollow, because there was nobody who truly cared to celebrate with me. I was living like an emotional island, surrounded by water but dying of thirst. But here's something interesting that happened during those lonely years. I started to discover who Jana Johnson really was beneath all the family expectations and conditioning. Without their voices telling me what I should be, how I should act, or what I should want from life, I began to hear my own voice for the first time. I discovered that I loved art, that I had a natural talent for business, that I was much stronger and more capable than anyone had ever given me credit for. The silence that felt like punishment was actually giving me the space to become authentically myself. The turning point came around year 10 of the exclusion, when I realized something profound. I had stopped waiting for them to change their minds about me. The desperate, needy part of me that used to check my phone hoping for their call had died somewhere along the way, replaced by a woman who had learned to validate herself. I was no longer the broken girl begging for crumbs of affection. I was becoming someone who commanded respect through her actions, her success, and her unwavering self-worth. And that transformation, as painful as it was to achieve, was about to become the very thing that would bring them crawling back to my door. The transformation didn't happen with some dramatic revelation or life-changing moment. It was more like waking up one morning and realizing that the person in the mirror was someone completely different from the broken girl who used to cry herself to sleep. I had been unconsciously building something powerful during all those years of isolation, an unshakable belief in my own worth that didn't depend on anyone else's approval. The pain of being abandoned had forged me into steel, and I was finally ready to use that strength to build something extraordinary. If you're in that dark place right now where rejection feels like it's going to destroy you, please hit subscribe and like this video, because I want you to see how that same pain can become your greatest source of power. I started small, with a freelance graphic design business that I ran from my tiny apartment. My family had always dismissed my artistic talents as impractical and unrealistic, but without their negative voices in my head, I was free to pursue what I was actually good at. Those first few clients were like little victories against everyone who had ever made me feel worthless. Every project I completed, every positive review I received, every dollar I earned was proof that I was capable of creating value in this world without needing their validation or support. The business grew faster than I had ever imagined possible, mainly because I poured all my hurt and determination into making it succeed. While other people were spending weekends with family, I was working on my craft, learning new skills, and building relationships with clients who actually valued what I brought to the table. The loneliness that had once felt like a curse became my competitive advantage. I had no distractions, no family drama to drain my energy, no one else's expectations to meet except my own. Within 5 years, my little freelance operation had evolved into a full-service creative agency with 12 employees and clients across 3 countries. I bought my own house, a beautiful Victorian that I decorated exactly the way I wanted without having to consider anyone else's opinion. I traveled to places I had only dreamed of, ate at restaurants that would have intimidated the old me, and surrounded myself with friends who chose to be in my life because they genuinely enjoyed my company, not because they were obligated by blood. But the real victory wasn't the money or the success. It was the moment I looked in the mirror and genuinely liked the person staring back at me. Jana Johnson had become someone worth knowing, someone worth respecting, someone worth loving. The family that had rejected me had unknowingly given me the greatest gift possible, the opportunity to discover that I didn't need their approval to be whole. I had become my own source of validation, my own cheerleader, my own family. And just when I thought I had completely moved on from needing them in any way, that's when they decided they wanted back into my life. It was a Tuesday evening in October when everything changed, and I'll never forget the sound of that doorbell ringing at 7:30 p.m. I wasn't expecting anyone. My friends knew to text before dropping by, and delivery drivers usually came during the day. When I opened the door, I honestly thought I was hallucinating for a moment. There stood my mother, Sarah, my father, Michael, and my sister, Rebecca, all dressed up like they were going to church, with nervous smiles and flowers in my mother's hands. For 15 years, these people had acted like I didn't exist, and now they were standing on my porch like nothing had ever happened. The first thing that struck me was how much older they all looked. 15 years had passed for them, too, and the people who had seemed so powerful and intimidating in my memories now looked smaller, more fragile somehow. My father's hair had gone completely gray. My mother had deep lines around her eyes that makeup couldn't hide. And Rebecca looked tired in a way that expensive clothes couldn't disguise. They were nervous, fidgeting with their hands and avoiding direct eye contact, like children who had been caught doing something wrong and were waiting to see how much trouble they were in. "Jana," my mother said, and her voice cracked a little when she said my name. We've missed you so much. We know we made mistakes, and we want to make things right." The irony was almost laughable. These were the same people who had made me feel like I was the mistake, like I was the problem that needed to be fixed or removed. Now they were standing there with their flowers and their rehearsed apologies, acting like 15 years of silence could be erased with a simple, "We've missed you." What shocked me the most wasn't their presence. It was my complete lack of emotional reaction to seeing them. I had imagined this moment so many times over the years, sometimes with anger, sometimes with tears, sometimes with forgiveness. But standing there in my doorway, looking at these strangers who happened to share my DNA, I felt nothing but a cool, analytical curiosity about what had brought them to my door after all this time. The desperate part of me that had once craved their love and acceptance was completely gone, replaced by someone who didn't need anything they had to offer. I invited them in, not out of warmth or excitement, but because I was genuinely curious about what had changed their minds after 15 years of treating me like I was dead to them. As they sat uncomfortably on my expensive furniture, looking around at the life I had built without them, I could see the mixture of regret and envy in their eyes. They were seeing the success, the beautiful home, the evidence of a life well lived, and perhaps for the first time, they were realizing what they had thrown away when they decided I wasn't worth their time. But what they didn't know yet was that I was about to find out their real motivation for this surprise visit, and it wasn't love that had brought them back to me. The truth about why they came back didn't take long to surface, and when it did, I wasn't surprised. I was actually impressed by how predictable they were. As we sat in my living room making awkward small talk, my mother kept glancing around at my expensive furniture, my original artwork, and the family photos that conspicuously didn't include any of them. My father was asking pointed questions about my business, how many employees I had, what kind of clients I worked with, and whether I had any big financial plans for the future. If you've ever had people suddenly show interest in you right after you became successful, smash that subscribe button and hit like, because you know exactly where this story is going and it's not pretty. It was my sister Rebecca who finally let the cat out of the box, probably because she was never good at keeping secrets or playing the long game like our parents. "Jana," she said, fidgeting with her purse strap, "we heard about your company from cousin Lisa. She saw an article about you in the business journal, and we had no idea you had become so successful." The way she said successful was like she was tasting something bitter, like my achievements were somehow personally offensive to her. That's when I knew this wasn't about missing me or realizing they had made a mistake. This was about money and what I could do for them. The conversation took an interesting turn when my father cleared his throat and launched into what was clearly a rehearsed speech about family investment opportunities. Apparently, Rebecca's husband Mark was starting a construction company and needed investors. My parents were looking at downsizing their home, but wanted to buy something nicer than they could actually afford. And there was some vague mention of medical bills and unexpected expenses. They weren't here because they had suddenly discovered they loved me. They were here because they had discovered I had money, and they thought blood relation entitled them to access to it. What made their approach even more insulting was how they tried to frame it as doing me a favor. "We thought you might want to help family," my mother said with that manipulative smile I remembered from childhood. "After all, What's the point of success if you can't share it with the people who love you? The audacity was breathtaking. These people who had treated me like I didn't exist for 15 years were now suggesting that giving them money would somehow be a privilege for me. They were acting like their sudden reappearance in my life should be cause for celebration and gratitude on my part. But here's what they didn't understand about the woman I had become during those 15 years of silence. I had learned to recognize manipulation from a mile away because I had been forced to navigate the world without the safety net of family support. Every business relationship, every friendship, every romantic connection had taught me to look beyond what people said to what they actually wanted. And what my family wanted wasn't a relationship with me. They wanted a relationship with my bank account. The question now was how I was going to handle this revelation. And trust me, they were about to learn that the scared little girl they remembered had grown into someone who didn't play games she couldn't win. The moment of truth came when I looked at each of them sitting in my living room and realized I held all the power in this situation. Something that would have been unimaginable 15 years ago when I was begging for their love and acceptance. I leaned back in my chair, took a slow sip of my coffee, and said the words that I had been unconsciously preparing to say for over a decade. So, let me understand this correctly. You want to be part of my life now because you need money, not because you miss having a daughter and sister who loves you. The silence that followed was so thick you could have cut it with a knife, and I could see the panic starting to creep into their eyes as they realized their plan wasn't working. My mother immediately went into damage control mode, trying to backtrack and insist that money had nothing to do with their visit, that they had been wanting to reconnect for years, but just didn't know how to approach me. But I had learned to read people during my years of running a business, and her body language was screaming lies louder than her words were proclaiming innocence. If you had wanted to reconnect, I said calmly, you could have called me when I graduated from college, or when I started my business, or during any of the 15 years when I was building this life you're so impressed by now. But you didn't call until you needed something from me. The confrontation escalated when Rebecca tried to guilt-trip me by bringing up our childhood memories and how close we used to be before everything changed. We're still family, Jana, she said with tears in her eyes that looked suspiciously rehearsed. Blood is thicker than water, and family should help each other. That's when I delivered the line that I had been unconsciously crafting in my mind for years. You're right, Rebecca. Blood is thicker than water, but loyalty is thicker than blood. And love is thicker than anything. And you chose to show me exactly how thick your love really was when you erased me from your lives for 15 years. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the garden I had planted and maintained by myself, thinking about all the holidays I had spent alone while they were creating memories without me. Here's what's going to happen, I said, turning back to face them. You're going to leave my house right now, and you're going to think very carefully about whether you want a real relationship with me, one that involves showing up during the bad times as well as when you need financial help, or if you just want access to my success. Because I'm not a bank, I'm not a charity, and I'm definitely not the desperate girl who used to beg for your attention. The look of shock on their faces was priceless, because they had clearly expected me to be so grateful for their attention that I would eagerly open my wallet to prove my worth to them. But 15 years of learning to value myself had taught me that anyone who only wants you when you have something they need isn't someone you want in your life anyway. As I walked them to the door, I felt a sense of power and clarity that I had never experienced before. For the first time in our relationship, I was the one setting the terms. I was the one in control, and I was the one who got to decide whether they deserved a second chance or not. After they left that evening, I sat in my living room surrounded by the silence that had become my closest companion over the years, and I found myself thinking deeply about what family really means. Is it just about sharing DNA and having the same last name? Or is it about something much deeper? About choosing to show up for each other through good times and bad? About unconditional love and genuine support? I had spent 15 years believing that I was somehow defective because my biological family didn't want me, but seeing them sitting in my home, desperate for my money but not my presence, made me realize that I had been asking the wrong question all along. The question wasn't, why don't they love me? It was, do people who abandon you when times get tough really deserve to be called family? I started thinking about the people who had actually been there for me during the hardest moments of my journey. There was my friend Marcus, who had helped me move into my first apartment when I couldn't afford movers, and never asked for a single favor in return. There was my mentor Elena, who had believed in my business idea when everyone else thought I was crazy, and had connected me with my first major client. There was my neighbor Mrs. Chen, who had brought me homemade soup when I was sick, and invited me over for dinner during holidays when she noticed I was always alone. These people had chosen to care about me without any biological obligation or expectation of financial gain. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that I had actually been surrounded by family all along. I just hadn't recognized it, because it didn't look like the traditional family structure I had been taught to expect. My chosen family was made up of people who celebrated my successes without jealousy, supported me through failures without judgment, and loved me for who I was rather than what I could do for them. They had earned their place in my life through consistency, loyalty, and genuine care, while my biological family had forfeited their place through neglect, abandonment, and conditional love. This revelation was both liberating and heartbreaking at the same time. Liberating because it freed me from the belief that I needed my biological family's approval to be complete, but heartbreaking because it meant accepting that the people who were supposed to love me unconditionally had failed at the most basic requirement of family bonds. I grieved for the relationship we could have had, for the holidays we could have shared, for the support we could have given each other through life's challenges. But I also felt grateful for the clarity this experience had given me about what real love looks like. As I sat there in my beautiful home, surrounded by evidence of the life I had built with my chosen family's support, I realized that my biological family's rejection had actually been a gift in disguise. It had forced me to develop standards for how I deserved to be treated, to recognize authentic love when I found it, and to create bonds based on mutual respect rather than obligation. The scared little girl who used to cry herself to sleep wondering why she wasn't good enough had grown into a woman who knew exactly what she was worth and wouldn't settle for anything less than genuine love and respect. And that transformation was about to inform every decision I made about whether to let them back into my life or not. The weeks following their surprise visit were filled with constant phone calls, text messages, and even flowers delivered to my office, as my family launched what I can only describe as a full-scale charm offensive. They were trying every manipulation tactic in the book. Guilt trips about wasting precious family time, promises about how different things would be this time, and even attempts to get mutual relatives to pressure me into giving them another chance. But here's the thing about building your self-worth from the ground up. You develop an incredibly sensitive radar for authentic versus performative behavior. If you've ever had people suddenly become super interested in you right after you set boundaries with them, please subscribe and hit that like button, because you know this dance, and you need to hear how this story ends. I realized that I was at a crossroads that would define not just my relationship with them, but my relationship with myself and my standards for how I allowed people to treat me. On one hand, there was a part of me that still remembered being that little girl who just wanted her family to love her, and that part was whispering, maybe they really have changed. Maybe this is your chance to have the family you always wanted. On the other hand, there was the strong woman I had become, who knew that actions speak louder than words, and that 15 years of silence followed by sudden interest when money was involved wasn't exactly evidence of genuine change. I decided to test their sincerity in a way that would reveal their true intentions without putting myself at risk of being hurt again. I called my mother and told her I was going through a difficult time with my business, which wasn't true, but I needed to see how they would react when they thought I might not be as financially successful as they had assumed. I mentioned struggling with some major client issues and potentially having to downsize my company, and I watched their response very carefully. Would they offer emotional support, show concern for my well-being, or ask how they could help me through a tough time? The results of my little experiment were exactly what I expected, but still disappointing. Instead of offering support or comfort, my mother's first response was to suggest that maybe I should consider other career options, and that family businesses can be very stable. My father called to say that maybe this was a sign that I should come back home and be part of the family again, implying that my independence and success had somehow been the problem all along. Rebecca's response was the most telling. She seemed almost relieved that I might not be as successful as she had thought, and she stopped mentioning her husband's need for investors altogether. That's when I knew with absolute certainty what kind of relationship I wanted with them. None at all. Not because I was holding a grudge or trying to punish them, but because I had learned to recognize the difference between people who love you and people who love what you can do for them. I wanted relationships built on mutual respect, genuine care, and unconditional support, and they had proven repeatedly that they were incapable of offering any of those things. So I made a decision that the old Jana never could have made. I chose myself, my peace, and my chosen family over the fantasy of reconciliation with people who had already shown me exactly who they were. And let me tell you, that decision was about to lead to the most empowering chapter of my entire story. The art of gaining respect from people who once dismissed you isn't about proving them wrong. It's about becoming so secure in your own worth that their opinion becomes irrelevant. After I made the decision to cut contact with my family again, something interesting happened. They started trying even harder to get my attention, but this time with a completely different energy. Instead of the entitled demands for money and investment opportunities, I started receiving messages that actually acknowledged the pain they had caused and the life I had built without them. It was like watching someone finally realize that the person they had thrown away was actually a diamond, not the worthless stone they had convinced themselves I was. The shift in their approach was dramatic and telling. My mother started sending me articles about successful businesswomen with notes like, "This reminded me of you and how proud I am of what you've accomplished." My father, who had never shown interest in my artistic talents, suddenly wanted to know about my creative process and my business philosophy. Rebecca began sharing childhood photos of us together on social media, with captions about missing my sister and regretting lost time. But here's the thing about respect that comes after rejection. It feels hollow when you know it's based on fear of losing access to something they want, rather than genuine appreciation for who you are. I realized that true respect can't be demanded or manipulated into existence. It has to be earned through consistent behavior over time. The respect I had gained from my clients, my employees, and my chosen family hadn't come from my success alone. It had come from my integrity, my reliability, and my genuine care for their well-being. These were qualities that my biological family had never bothered to notice or value when I was younger, and their sudden recognition of these traits now felt like too little, too late. But there was something powerful about watching them scramble to regain access to my life while knowing that I held all the cards. For the first time in our relationship, they needed me more than I needed them. And that reversal of power dynamics was both satisfying and enlightening. I wasn't using this power to be cruel or to get revenge. I was using it to maintain the boundaries that protected the peace and happiness I had worked so hard to build. Every email I didn't answer immediately, every invitation I declined, every boundary I maintained was a small act of self-respect that reinforced my worth. The most interesting part of this whole process was discovering that I didn't actually want their respect anymore. The validation I had once craved from them felt meaningless compared to the self-respect I had cultivated and the genuine love I had found with my chosen family. Their desperate attempts to reconnect weren't making me feel valued. They were making me feel grateful that I had learned to value myself enough to walk away from people who only appreciated me when it served their interests. And that realization was leading me to some profound insights about what this entire experience had taught me about strength, resilience, and the true meaning of family. Looking back on those 15 years of exclusion, I can honestly say that being rejected by my family was the best thing that ever happened to me, even though it was also the most painful. Without their constant criticism and conditional love, I was free to discover who Jana Johnson really was beneath all the layers of people-pleasing and desperate need for approval that had defined my younger years. The silence that once felt like punishment became the space where I learned to hear my own voice, trust my own judgment, and develop the unshakable confidence that would become the foundation of everything I built afterward. Rejection taught me that I could survive being unloved by the people who were supposed to love me unconditionally, which meant I could survive anything. The first major lesson I learned was the difference between being alone and being lonely. During the early years of exclusion, I was both alone and desperately lonely, constantly aching for connection and validation from people who had made it clear they didn't want to give it to me. But as I gradually built a life filled with people who chose to be there, I discovered that being alone could actually be peaceful, productive, and empowering. I learned to enjoy my own company, to make decisions without needing consensus from others, and to find fulfillment in my own achievements rather than seeking applause from people who didn't appreciate my efforts anyway. Exclusion also taught me to recognize authentic relationships versus transactional ones. When you're forced to build connections from scratch as an adult, you become very good at identifying people who are interested in you as a person versus people who are interested in what you can do for them. This skill served me incredibly well in business, in friendship, and eventually in romance when I met people who wanted to be with me for who I was rather than what I could provide. My family's recent return to my life was just another opportunity to practice this skill, and their failure to pass the authenticity test confirmed everything I had learned about the difference between real love and selfish interest. Perhaps the most valuable lesson was learning that my worth doesn't depend on other people's recognition of it. For years, I had believed that if my own family didn't see value in me, then maybe there wasn't any value to see. But building a successful business, creating meaningful friendships, and developing genuine self-respect taught me that my worth was inherent and constant, regardless of whether others acknowledged it or not. This lesson protected me from being devastated by their rejection and empowered me to set boundaries that preserved my peace and happiness. The final and most profound lesson was understanding that sometimes the people who hurt us the most are actually doing us the greatest favor. My family's exclusion forced me to develop strength I never knew I had, independence I never thought I could achieve, and standards I never would have set if I had remained dependent on their approval. The scared, insecure girl who used to beg for their love had transformed into a confident woman who commanded respect through her actions and choices. Their rejection had been the catalyst for becoming the person I was always meant to be, someone who knew her worth and wouldn't settle for anything less than genuine love and respect. And that transformation was about to inform the final chapter of this story in ways that would surprise even me. If someone had told me 15 years ago that being abandoned by my family would eventually become the greatest gift of my life, I would have thought they were crazy. But sitting here today, looking back on this incredible journey of transformation, I can honestly say that their rejection was the catalyst that forced me to discover a strength I never knew I had. The pain that once felt like it would destroy me became the foundation for everything beautiful I built afterward. My business, my chosen family, my unshakable self-worth, and most importantly, my ability to recognize and demand genuine love and respect. If you're going through your own season of rejection right now, please hit that subscribe button and give this video a like, because I want you to know that your current pain is not your permanent reality, and the strength you're building right now is going to serve you in ways you can't even imagine yet. The transformation didn't happen overnight, and it wasn't easy. There were countless nights when I cried myself to sleep, days when I felt like giving up, and moments when I wondered if I would ever feel truly loved and valued by anyone. But every tear, every sleepless night, every moment of crushing loneliness was building something powerful inside me that I couldn't see at the time. I was developing emotional muscles that people from loving families never need to build. The ability to validate myself, to find peace in solitude, to recognize authentic love when it appeared, and to walk away from anything that threatened my peace without looking back. The most beautiful part of this story isn't the revenge or the satisfaction of watching them beg for my attention after years of indifference. The real victory is who I became in the process. Someone who knows her worth so deeply that external validation became unnecessary. Someone who built meaningful relationships based on mutual respect and genuine care. Someone who transformed childhood wounds into adult wisdom. I learned that being rejected by the wrong people is actually protection from settling for less than I deserve, and that sometimes the most loving thing people can do for you is show you early on that they're not capable of loving you the way you need to be loved. Today, my life is filled with people who choose to be there, friends who celebrate my successes without jealousy, colleagues who respect my boundaries without question, and romantic relationships built on genuine compatibility rather than convenience or obligation. I wake up every morning in a home I created, surrounded by beauty I chose, living a life that reflects my values and dreams rather than someone else's expectations. The scared little girl who used to beg for crumbs of affection has grown into a woman who commands respect and gives love freely to those who have earned it through their actions, not their DNA. If you're currently in your own season of rejection, abandonment, or exclusion, I want you to hear this. Your pain is not permanent, but the strength you're developing because of it will last forever. Every person who walks away from you is making room for someone better to walk into your life. Every family member who can't see your worth is protecting you from wasting your energy on people who don't deserve it. Every closed door is redirecting you toward the open door that leads to your real family, your real success, your real happiness. Trust the process, trust your worth, and trust that the person you're becoming through this pain is going to be absolutely unstoppable. The best chapters of your story are still being written, and they're going to be more beautiful than anything you've lost. As I sit here telling you this story, I can't help but marvel at the woman I've become compared to who I was 15 years ago. The Jana who opened that door to find her family standing on her porch was someone completely different from the broken girl who had been excluded from their lives. I was confident, successful, emotionally intelligent, and most importantly, I had learned to love and value myself in a way that made their approval completely irrelevant. This transformation wasn't just about building a business or accumulating wealth. It was about developing an unshakable sense of self-worth that couldn't be diminished by other people's opinions or actions. The most profound change wasn't in my circumstances, though those certainly improved dramatically. It was in my relationship with myself. I had gone from being someone who needed external validation to survive emotionally, to someone who generated her own sense of worth from within. I no longer needed anyone to tell me I was valuable, talented, or deserving of love because I knew these things about myself with absolute certainty. This internal shift changed everything about how I moved through the world, how I formed relationships, and how I made decisions about who deserved access to my time, energy, and heart. Looking back on my family's surprise visit now, I can see it for what it really was. Not a reunion or a reconciliation, but a final test of how much I had truly grown. The old Jana would have been so desperate for their love and acceptance that she would have overlooked their obvious financial motivations and welcomed them back with open arms, probably even giving them the money they wanted just to feel like she belonged somewhere. But the new Jana saw right through their manipulation and had the strength to protect herself from being used and discarded again. The peace I feel now about that decision confirms that I made the right choice. There are no sleepless nights wondering if I should have given them another chance. No regrets about walking away from people who only valued me for what I could provide them. Instead, I feel grateful that I had developed enough self-respect to recognize the difference between people who love you and people who love what you can do for them. That clarity has protected me from countless other situations where people have tried to take advantage of my success or manipulate me into compromising my boundaries. The woman I am today is someone I genuinely admire and respect. Someone who builds others up instead of tearing them down. Someone who gives generously to those who have earned it through loyalty and genuine care. Someone who creates beauty and success while maintaining her integrity and values. I am surrounded by people who see me, value me, and choose me every single day. Not because they have to, but because they want to. And most importantly, I am someone who would never abandon a family member the way I was abandoned, because I understand the profound impact that kind of rejection can have on a person's life. My family's rejection taught me how not to treat people I claim to love, and that lesson has made me a better friend, a better partner, and hopefully someday, a better mother than the one who raised me. After hearing my story, I want you to ask yourself this question. What would you have done in my place when they showed up at my door after 15 years of silence? Would you have let them back in because they're family? Or would you have protected the peace and happiness you worked so hard to build? The truth is, there's no right or wrong answer. There's only the answer that honors your worth and protects your well-being. If this story has resonated with you, if you've ever felt abandoned, excluded, or undervalued by people who were supposed to love you, please hit that subscribe button and give this video a like, because I want you to know that your story doesn't end with their rejection. It begins with your decision to choose yourself. Every person watching this video right now has the power to transform their pain into strength, their rejection into redirection, and their exclusion into the motivation to build something extraordinary. The people who walk away from you aren't taking your worth with them. They're simply revealing that they were never capable of recognizing it in the first place. Your value doesn't decrease because someone fails to see it, just like a diamond doesn't lose its brilliance because someone mistakes it for a piece of glass. The family that rejects you is making room for the family that will choose you, celebrate you, and stand by you through everything life brings your way. I need you to understand that the pain you're feeling right now, as unbearable as it might seem, is actually building something powerful inside you that will serve you for the rest of your life. Every tear you've cried is watering the seeds of your future strength. Every sleepless night is teaching you that you can survive anything. Every moment of loneliness is preparing you to recognize genuine love when it appears in your life. The person you're becoming through this struggle is going to be someone who commands respect, creates beauty, and inspires others who are walking the same difficult path you're on right now. Do you believe revenge ever truly brings peace, or does it just feed more anger? In my experience, the best revenge isn't plotting against the people who hurt you. It's building a life so beautiful, so fulfilling, and so authentic that their absence becomes irrelevant. When you reach the point where you're genuinely grateful for their rejection, because it led you to something better, that's when you know you've truly won. That's when you realize that they didn't reject you. They redirected you toward your real family, your real purpose, and your real happiness. If you want more stories about overcoming family rejection, building unshakable self-worth, and transforming pain into power, make sure to subscribe to this channel and turn on notifications so you never miss an update. Share this video with anyone who needs to hear that their current pain is not their permanent reality, and that the strength they're building right now is going to change their life in ways they can't even imagine yet. Remember, you are not defined by who abandons you. You are defined by how you rise after they're gone. Your comeback story starts now, and I can't wait to see the incredible person you become through this journey of transformation. I'll see you in the next video, where I'll be sharing more stories about turning life's biggest challenges into your greatest victories.